Breaking tonight, new questions about the horrific kidnapping of nearly 300 schoolgirls and whether Hillary Clinton and her State Department could and should have done more to track and target this terror group behind the attack. Good evening, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. This is the Kelly File. We have been following the story of the radical Islamic terror group Boko Haram after this group stormed a school in Nigeria nearly 3 weeks ago, taking away hundreds of schoolgirls in a convoy of vehicles. Their leader later seen gloating on video, vowing to sell the girls.
I sell women, and I'll sell women as commanded by Allah until the land is filled with the blood of unbelievers.
Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is credited with being one of the first people to bring attention to this kidnapping, with her Twitter messages slugged hashtag Bring Back the Girls. And just last night, she condemned this terror group.
The seizure of these young women by this radical extremist group, Boko Haram, is abominable, it's criminal, it's an act of terrorism, and it really merits the fullest response possible.
It's an act of terrorism, she says. But tonight, the Daily Beast is reporting that it was Hillary Clinton herself that campaigned against putting these kidnappers on the list of terrorist organizations when she was in control of the State Department, and that she did that repeatedly. That as far back as January of 2012, letters from the Department of Justice, the CIA, members of Congress, the FBI were sent to the State Department pleading, to no avail, that this group be put on the State Department's list of terrorists. Congressman Peter King even warned that, quote, we are deeply concerned that Boko Haram's tactics, targeting, and fundraising operations appear to be increasingly international in scope, including within the U.S. homeland. Despite a number of similar letters and pleas to follow, Secretary Clinton's State Department never took action. And now some of those involved have gone to the media saying, quote, the one thing she could have done, the one tool she had at her disposal, she didn't use. And nobody can say she wasn't urged to do it. It is gross hypocrisy. Joining me now, Chris Direwalt, who's our Fox News digital politics editor, and Brooke Goldstein, who's a human rights attorney and director of the Lawfare Project. So when I first heard people were trying to cast any blame on America or our State Department or Hillary Clinton for what's happened in Nigeria, to be honest, I rolled my eyes. And then I read more about how great the push had been to get the State Department to label this group a terror organization, and the strong resistance within state under her watch to do it. Brooke, they have come out and said, her defender said the reason she didn't do it is because it's basically a local matter, and they didn't want to empower this local terrorist group by giving it this designation. Do you buy that?
Absolutely not. I mean, it's akin to arguing that we don't want to call a terrorist group because we're going to make them mad, because, you know, in some way or another, it's going to facilitate their ability to raise money. And the exact opposite is true. Designating a terrorist group is a very important tool in ceasing the ability of that terrorist group to engage in their activities to raise money. What it does is it forces the entire weight of the U.S. government to go against that terrorist group. It makes it illegal for that group to engage in financial activities within our market. It makes it illegal for any organizations to provide material support to that terrorist group. It also sends a signal to the world that this group needs to be stigmatized. And the opposite, the failure to designate this group, sends a green light. Go ahead, continue with your terrorist activities. You can do it with impunity. We're going to turn a blind eye.
Chris, Andy McCarthy of the National Review Online, who comes on this program quite often, writes a scathing column about this today. And he concludes by saying, from Benghazi to the Brotherhood in Egypt to Boko Haram, this terror group and beyond, Hillary Clinton's tenure at the State Department was a disaster. He writes, but she is an excellent tweeter because she sent out a tweet saying we must stand up to terrorism, talking about this very group that she declined to label a terrorist group on our State Department terrorist list. Will this become a political issue?
It already is. And to the point of your question to Brooke, whether that rationale is legitimate or not, the truth is it was incorrect. And as we see there, and whether it's there or Benghazi or the Russia reset or whatever else, if you think about it, at one time the argument was that Hillary Clinton was going to have sort of a do-nothing term as Secretary of State, that the president mostly worked around her and wasn't really that interested in foreign policy anyway, so she didn't get to do much but log a lot of miles. Now, as we see what John Kerry's doing and we see what the consequences are, her decisions and her choices in real time are consequential to the extreme degree, because now she's the 2016 Democratic frontrunner and the main hope for that party. All those things take on new significance.
And yet, Brooke, when you look at all the incoming to the State Department when she was in control, saying, put them on the list, labeled them as a terrorist organization. In fact, when she refused to do it, they tried to push through legislation that would force her to do it. And there was a bipartisan conclusion that they needed to be put on that list. It wasn't just the Republicans, but she wouldn't do it. Now, in retrospect, some are saying the reason she didn't want to do it is not because she didn't want to empower them by giving them this label, but because there is an idea that doing so that would have angered them, and that this is more of sort of an attempt to say, hey, don't worry, radical Islam, we're not going to give you these labels, we're going to change our own policies internally, and then you won't hate us anymore.
Yeah, and not only did she not do it, but the State Department actively lobbied against the designation. At the same time, we have quotes from the State Department denying, I quote, Boko Haram is not an organized, ideologically driven movement like Al-Qaeda. It is the result of natural social dynamics driven by poverty. That is a quote from 2012 by the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. So this administration is denying that there is a theological motivation to Islamist terrorism and is turning a blind eye to the Islamist terrorist war on Christianity, the war on the West. They are not condemning what's happening in Pakistan. They're not condemning the brutal slaughter of Christians in Egypt. Just a couple weeks ago, we had a woman who was literally torn apart on the street by Muslim Brotherhood supporters because she was wearing a cross on her neck. And this is completely ignored by the Obama administration, because in their view, there is no such thing as Islamist terrorism.
You know, Chris, there's no, you can't pin the actions of these terrorists on anybody other than themselves. But this, as you point out, could become a campaign issue because of the notions of radical Islam, of what terror groups like this are motivated by, and how they can or cannot be hobbled. And it's a narrative we've heard used against Democrats before.
The best thing that Hillary Clinton has going for her as she looks towards a general election is her hawkish stance on foreign policy. If this is the case, and if what we see in Benghazi, if it is true, the allegation that she failed to order a response, those allegations prove to be very serious for somebody whose hawkishness is supposed to be their political selling point.
I do want to tell the audience that she did put 3 leaders of Boko Haram on a terrorist list in 2012, but continued to decline to put the group on our terrorist list, believing that it could enhance their reputation. Panel, thank you both.